Hello students, my name is Saurabh Bhatia. Today we will be discussing the last and final part of the financial statements of not-for-profit organization. In the previous two videos, we have already discussed about the introductory part and first two major topics of this chapter. So in case if you have not gone through those videos, I humbly request you to please go and watch those two videos first. Only then you will be easily going to understand the content of this particular video. So let's get started and move on to the topic number 3 of this chapter, that is adjustment for any other income or expense. In the second video, we have discussed about the adjustment pertaining to subscription. I am highlighting that particular adjustment here again because the adjustments in context of subscription and adjustment for any other income or expense are 100% same. There is no difference in adjustment of subscription and adjustment of any other income or expense in context of this particular chapter. So the important thing is, in our previous class, we have made adjustments in context of outstanding, prepaid expenses, accrued and unearned incomes. In the same manner, in this particular chapter, we have to deal with these adjustments again as well. In context of expense, we will be dealing with outstanding and prepaid expenses, and in context of incomes, we will be dealing with accrued and unearned income. As we already know that outstanding expenses are an example of current liability, prepaid expenses are an example of current asset, accrued income is an example of current asset, and unearned income is an example of current liability. It is important to quote here for these particular things that under which category do they fall in order to represent them in respective balance sheet. Precisely the same adjustment which was taught in case of subscription remains same here. In case if we take an example of expense, say for an example, salary paid during current year as per receipt and payment account. As we must know that receipt and payment account doesn't reflect the figures of current year only, it might include the figures from previous year and figure of upcoming year as well. So while drafting income and expenditure account on the basis of receipt and payment account, the problem arises is we cannot rely only on the figure of receipt and payment account. We have to make due adjustment in context of given situation. So the salary paid amount which was given in receipt and payment account to the payment side should be adjusted accordingly in context of four things, that is outstanding, prepaid, accrueds and unearned for both incomes and expenses. So if we particularly talk about salary paid, that is an example of expenditure. If we particularly talk about this, what adjustments do we have to make here? Outstanding at the end of current year should be added to the amount of salary paid during current year. Prepaid in the beginning of current year should also be added. Outstanding in the beginning of current year and prepaid at the end of current year should be deducted. See, it is the same adjustment which remains in the case of subscription as well. That is, outstanding in the beginning should be deducted. Outstanding at the end should be added. Prepaid in the beginning should be added and prepaid at the end should be deducted. The adjustment remains 100% same as in the case of subscription, and same thing goes with adjustment in context of any income as well. So if we take an example of randomly an income, that is rent received during current year, again as per receipt and payment account, what adjustments do we have to make? Outstanding at the end of current year, outstanding in the beginning of current year, prepaid at the end of current year, prepaid in the beginning of current year. All the adjustment remains the same. Outstanding at the end of current year should be added, prepaid in the beginning of current year should be added, and vice versa. Outstanding in the beginning of current year and prepaid at the end of current year should be deducted. All these adjustments are 100% same as in the case of subscription, which we have already discussed. There is no change at all. Let's quickly go through an example. Let's just solve a numerical for this particular case so that you will be able to understand it easily. So from the following information related to Navjeevan NPO as on 31st March 2020, represent them in proper accounts. See, there is a small representation of receipt and payment account which states rent was received rupees 50,000 during current year and salary was paid during current year rupees 60,000. At first, we will talk about rent only. Obviously, it is given on receipt side, which means it is an example of income. So it will be shown to the credit side of income and expenditure account. Rent received was 50,000 during current year, which is posted over here to the credit side of receipt and payment account, that the rent received was rupees 50,000, which we have shown right here to the credit side of income and expenditure account. Now let's quickly go through what adjustments have been given in question pertaining to rent. That rent was outstanding as on 1st April 2019 and as on 31st March 2020. See, my current financial year ends on 31st March 2020. So information in the question is given for the beginning of year and at the end of the year. Position was given for both the time, in the beginning of the year and at the end of the year as well. So rent outstanding. See, rent here was taken as an example of receipt, as an example of income. So here the term rent outstanding means an accrued income. If rent is receivable, that is an income, and if receivable income remains outstanding, that is an example of accrued income. So basically, accrued rent in the beginning of year was 5,000 and at the end of the year was rupees 4,000. Rent prepaid, that is received in advance in the beginning of year, was rupees 2,000 and at the end of the year was 1,000. Let's quickly make the adjustment for these particular thing. Amount of rupees 50,000 was received during the current year. So we have put it right here to the credit of income and expenditure account. In the beginning of the year, 5,000 rupees were outstanding. So these 5,000 rupees must have been received during current year. That is a basic assumption which NPO makes, that any income or any expense which remains outstanding during previous year was paid or recovered during current year. So rent outstanding in the beginning of the year, that is rupees 5,000, must have been recovered during current year, which had already been added in 50,000. But these 5,000 are not actually part of current year's income. So these 5,000 must be deducted from 50,000. So outstanding in the beginning of current year, that is rupees 5,000, are deducted from total rent received during current year. Rupees 50,000 was the total rent received during current year, minus 5,000 has been done from that. Why? Because these 5,000 rupees does not relate to current year's income. Let's move to the second part of adjustment. Rupees 4,000 are still outstanding by the end of current financial year. What does these 4,000 rupees means? That during current financial year, I was asking for rent. I was expecting rent of rupees 4,000, but practically during current financial year, I have not yet received those 4,000 rupees. But technically those 4,000 rupees were actually a part of current year's income. Hence, rent outstanding, that is accrued income, accrued rent outstanding by the end of current financial year, should be added to the amount received during current year, because these 4,000 rupees actually forms the part of income for current financial year. Let's move to the next adjustment, that is rent prepaid, rent received in advance. So the rent of rupees 2,000 which was received in advance in the beginning of year must be relating to current financial year. See, someone has paid me rent in the very beginning of financial year. So that amount of rent must be related to current year itself. Same logic applies as in the case of subscription. So 2,000 is the amount which was actually received during previous year. But these 2,000 rupees are actually income of current year. These were only received during previous year, but actually an income of current year. So these 2,000 rupees should be added to current year's rent. In the same manner, rent received in advance by the end of current financial year, that is rupees 1,000. See, now current financial year is ending end, by the end of current financial year, you are receiving rupees 1000 rupees, which are received in this year, but it is related to upcoming financial year. So these 1000 rupees were already been added in 50,000 rupees, which was received during current financial year. But these rupees 1000 do not actually forms part of current year's income. So this sum of rupees 1000 should be deducted from amount which was received during current year. So after making all these four adjustments pertaining to rent, be it outstanding or prepaid in the beginning or at the end, what final amount we are getting is 50,000. How we have derived this amount? 50,000 plus 454 plus 256 minus 551 minus 1 comes to 50,000. That is the amount which we are supposed to show to the credit side of income and expenditure account. Now let's move to the second part of question, that is adjustment pertaining to an expense, that is payment of salary. Adjustments remains the same as in the case of rent, which we have discussed. Salary outstanding in the beginning, salary outstanding at the end, salary prepaid in the beginning and salary prepaid at the end. Each and every adjustment remains the same. See, throughout current financial year, we have paid rupees 60,000 in form of salary that should be debited to income and expenditure account since it was part of current year's expense. But do they relate to current financial year only, or are there any part of previous financial year as well? Yes, there was some part of previous and upcoming financial year as well, which were involved, which were already included in the amount of 60,000. So we have to adjust those amounts accordingly. So the total amount of rupees 60,000 was paid during current financial year, out of which rupees 3,000 was outstanding in the beginning, which means this payment of salary is made during current financial year, but that is not an expense of current financial year. It was outstanding since previous financial year. So these 3,000 rupees must be deducted from current financial year's amount. So from amount of rupees 60,000 that has been put to the debit side of income and expenditure account, we are supposed to deduct rupees 3,000 because it does not relates to current financial year. It relates to previous financial year. Let's move to the second adjustment. 7,000 rupees were outstanding by the end of current financial year, which basically means during this particular year, during our current year, we have not paid salary of rupees 7,000 to our employees. Basically, it was a part of current year's expense that remains unpaid by the end of current financial year. So it is a part of current year's expense, hence should be added to the amount that has been paid during current year. The amount was rupees 60,000, which was paid during current financial year. 7,000 were outstanding by the end of current financial year, were actually a part of expense of current year, hence should be added. Third part is 6,000 were prepaid in the beginning. Salary prepaid in the beginning basically means I have paid salary by the end of previous year, but that was an expense of current year. Salary was actually paid in previous year, but that was an expense of current year. That is why it has been quoted now. It was prepaid in the beginning of current financial year. It forms a part of current year expense, hence 6,000 should be added to the total right here. In the same manner, 8,000 were paid in advance by the end of current financial year, which means it was paid by the end of current financial year, but it was not actually the expense of current year, but it is an expense of upcoming year. We have paid salary in advance. So the movement of money happens in this year, but actual expense will be accounted in upcoming year. So these 8,000 rupees were not actually part of current year's expense. So it should be deducted right here. So basically after making all these adjustments, that is 60,000 plus 7,000 plus 6,000 minus 3,000 minus 8,000. The final amount that should be shown to the debit side of income and expenditure account is rupees 62,000. So by far adjustment remains the same in case of any other income or expense as we have discussed in case of subscription. Outstanding in the beginning should be deducted. Outstanding at the end should be added. Prepaid in the beginning should be added and prepaid at the end should be deducted. Let's move on to their representation in balance sheet as figures in the beginning of year are supposed to get represented in opening balance sheet and figures at the end of current year are supposed to be represented in closing balance sheet. Let's quickly move on. Rent was taken as an example of receipt, as an example of income. So the rent outstanding, that is accrued income, as on 1st April 2019 will be shown to the asset side of opening balance sheet. It is obviously clear to all the students that accrued income is an example of current asset. So rent outstanding in the beginning of year rupees 5,000 is shown to the asset side of opening balance sheet. Rent prepaid, that is received in advance in the beginning of year 2000, rent is taken as an example of income, and any income which is prepaid, basically received in advance, frames a part of current liability. So rupees 2000 will be shown to the liability side of opening balance sheet. In the same manner, salary which has been taken as an example of expense, if it remains outstanding, is going to frame a part of current liability. Any expense which remains unpaid is an example of current liability. So salary outstanding in the beginning of year rupees 3000 is shown to the liability side of balance sheet. In the same manner, salary paid in advance, salary prepaid in the beginning of current financial year will frame part of current asset, so should be shown to the asset side of opening balance sheet. So all the opening figures, that is 5,000, 2,000, 3,000 and 6,000 have been shown to their respective position, 5,000, 2,000, 3,000 and 6,000. In the same manner, we have to deal with the figures at the end of current financial year as well. Let's just quickly go through. Rent outstanding, that is accrued income at the end 4,000 frames part of asset. Rent prepaid, that is received in advance, frame parts of current liability. Salary outstanding by the end of current financial year frames a part of current liability. And salary prepaid by the end of current financial year frames a part of current asset. So these are the basic representations which you are supposed to make in balance sheet extract in the beginning and at the end of current financial year. So by far we have covered three crucial topics of this particular chapter, that is donations, subscriptions and any other adjustment pertaining to income or expense, which by far remains same as in the case of subscription. Let's move to the last and final topic of this chapter. Topic number 4 is cost of consumables. Let's just quickly revise what basically consumable means. So any not-for-profit organization, if buys something for their own consumption, such as medicines, food materials, stationery material, etc., are basically consumables. So we have to compute the cost of consumables in order to represent it to the debit of income and expenditure account. Obviously, if we are buying consumables, it is going to cost us. We are spending certain sum of money. So it is an example of expense. Now the question comes, why do we need to make adjustments in context of consumables, or what adjustments should be made in context of consumables? See, the amount paid during current year for consumables will obviously be shown to the payment side of receipt and payment account. Basically means during current year, whatever amount I have spent in order to buy consumables must be appearing to the credit side of receipt and payment account. But again, I cannot rely only on that particular figure only, because receipt and payment account includes figure of previous year, current year, or even upcoming year as well. Whereas while drafting income and expenditure account, we have to be careful that amount related to current year only should be shown in income and expenditure account. So in order to make those adjustments, in order to eliminate previous year or any upcoming year figure from that gross figure which is given in receipt and payment account, we have to make 6 adjustments by far in context of consumables. These adjustments could be in context of stock of consumables in the beginning of year, stock of consumables at the end of current year, creditors for consumables in the beginning of current year, creditors at the end of current year, any advance payment made in the beginning of current year, and any advance payment made by the end of current financial year. So we basically have to take into consideration these 6 things while computing cost of consumables. Though it is not always necessary that all 6 things will be given in the question. If any of these information is missing, treat it as nil value. Say for an example, if there is no advance payment given in the question, just leave it, just forget it. Assume its value as nil and attempt your question by remaining values, be it of stock or of creditors. So it is not necessary that value of all these 6 adjustments will be given in the question. If any of these value is not given, treat it as nil. So what adjustments do we have to make? First, we have to pick the figure from receipt and payment account itself. So the receipt and payment account will be showing an amount which will be appearing to the credit side of receipt and payment account. That is amount paid for consumables during current year. So what adjustments do we have to make? First one is stock of consumables in the beginning. What we have to do with the opening stock? The opening stock of consumables will be used during current year. Understand it like this. If I am running a not-for-profit organization and I am looking after and I'm taking care of old age persons, due to their seniority and old age, they tends to fall ill again and again, and I have to go and buy medicines for them. Instead, I have opened a medical shop inside my NPO itself. So I have to maintain a proper stock keeping, a proper record of medicines. So if during current financial year, I have purchased medicines of rupees 1 lakh and I am already having medicines of rupees 20,000, which I had purchased in any previous year, that has been kept as a stock. So I am supposed to use those medicines as well in this particular year. So opening stock of consumables is supposed to be utilized, is supposed to be used during current year. So opening stock will be used during current year. So it should be added to amount paid for consumables during current year. See, the first step was to pick amount from receipt and payment account. The amount must be appearing to the credit side of receipt and payment account. In that amount, what we have to do, we have to add the amount of opening stock. That is the accounting treatment of opening stock in this particular case. What we have to do, we have to add the amount of opening stock to the amount of consumables which we have picked from receipt and payment account. Second adjustment is, since it is opening stock, so it will be shown to the asset side of opening balance sheet as well. In case if we need to draft opening balance sheet in a question which also contains consumables, so make sure you put the value of opening stock to the asset side of opening balance sheet as well. Let's move to the stock at the end. So as we had taken an example already, that I bought medicine of rupees 1 lakh during current financial year and I was having a stock of medicines worth rupees 20,000 already. So in total, stock of medicines left with me worth rupees 1,20,000. If by the end of current financial year, I am having medicines of 30,000, it simply means I have not yet used those medicines during current financial year. So closing stock of medicine or consumables indicates what? That the consumable was not used during current year. So if it has not been used during current financial year, that should not be charged to income and expenditure account. So it should be deducted from amount paid for consumables during current year. Basically, 1 lakh was the amount paid for purchase of consumables. 20,000 was I'm already having. Total is 1,20,000. If by the end of year I am having a stock of 30,000 rupees of medicine, I have to deduct rupees 30,000. Basically 1 lakh, that is amount paid during current year for purchase of consumables, add opening stock, that is rupees 20,000, less closing stock, that is rupees 30,000, is the adjustment which we are supposed to make. Second adjustment for closing stock will be that it will be shown to the asset side of closing balance sheet. Opening stock will be shown in opening balance sheet, closing stock will be shown in closing balance sheet, and stock is an example of asset, so it will be shown to the asset side. Let's move to the third adjustment, that is creditors in the beginning. Let's first understand the meaning of creditors in the beginning. Creditors in the beginning means what? We purchased consumables in previous year from a supplier, but we have not yet made the payment for those consumables to the supplier. I purchased medicines from Mr. A in previous year, but I have not yet made the payments of those medicines to Mr. A in previous year, is basically creditors in the beginning. So we have bought material from them in previous year, but payment was not made in previous year. Then when was the payment made? It is assumed that payment was made during current year. See, the medicines were purchased or the consumables were purchased during previous year. So that is an expense of previous year, which is actually paid during current year. So money flows out in current year, but it was an expense of previous year. It should not be accounted in current year's income and expenditure account, but in previous year's income and expenditure account. So the amount paid to the creditors in the beginning during current year should be deducted from current year's amount because it does not frame part of current year's expense. The amount paid to creditors in the beginning does not frame part of current year's expense, so it should be deducted from amount paid for consumables during current year. Last adjustment from accounting point of view of this particular topic is that it should be shown to the liability side of opening balance sheet. In case if we need to draft opening balance sheet in this kind of question, creditors in the beginning will be shown to the liability side of opening balance sheet. Let's move to creditors at the end. Basically means we have purchased material during current year, we have purchased consumables during current year, but we have not yet made the payment for those consumables. So the money doesn't flows out during current financial year, but actually that was a part of current financial year. That was an expense of current financial year. So it should be accounted for accordingly, should be added to the total expense of current year. So creditors at the end basically means what? That we have bought material from them during current year, but payment was not made during current year. So it is a part of current year's expense, so it should be added to the amount paid for consumables during current year. Next adjustment from accounting point of view is that creditors at the end is an example of current liability, so it should be shown to the liability side of closing balance sheet. By far we have discussed these four things. Let's just quickly revise it. Stock in the beginning should be added as we are going to use it during current year. Stock at the end should be deducted as it remains unused during current year. Creditors in the beginning should be deducted as it does not frame part of current year's expense. It was part of previous year's expense. Creditors at the end should be added as the payment was not made, but it was part of current year's expense. Now let's cover remaining two topics, that is advance payment in the beginning and advance payment at the end. What does advance payment in the beginning means? Basically means in the very beginning of current financial year or by the end of previous financial year, I have paid in advance certain sum of money to the supplier of consumables. Understand it? By the end of previous year, I have made a payment to the supplier of consumables in order to get consumable for current year. Payment was made in previous year, but consumables will be delivered in current year. So that is part of current year's expense. which was actually paid in previous year. Since it is a part of current year's expense, so it should be added to the amount paid during current year. So advance payment in the beginning means what? It is paid by the end of previous year. It is a part of current year's expense, so should be added to the amount paid for consumables during the year. And next part from accounting point of view is that advance payment to supplier is an example of prepaid expense, and prepaid expense falls under the category of example of what? Current assets. So it should be shown to the asset side of opening balance sheet as well. Let's move to the last part, that is advance payment at the end. See, by the end of current financial year, you are paying in advance certain sum of money to the supplier of the material, to the supplier of the consumable. So the current year had already been passed. You are paying it for upcoming financial year. So the money is going out during current year, but it is not a part of current year's expense. Rather, it is a part of upcoming year's expense. So it should be deducted from the amount paid during current year. So advance payment made at the end is actually paid by the end of current year. It is not a part of current year's expense, so it should be deducted from the amount paid for consumables during the year. And last adjustment from accounting point of view is that advance payment to supplier is an example of prepaid expense, hence should be shown to the asset side of closing balance sheet. Precisely, figures in the beginning, that is these three figures, will be shown in opening balance sheet, and figures at the end will be shown in closing balance sheet to their respective sides, be it asset or liability. So finally, what adjustments do we have to make? Stock in the beginning will be added, stock at the end will be deducted, creditors in the beginning will be deducted, creditors at the end will be added, advance payment in the beginning will be added, and advance payment at the end will be deducted. These are 6 adjustments which we are supposed to make in context of cost of consumables. Now let's quickly discuss what type of questions are we going to face from this particular topic. See, for this particular topic, question might confuses you by using 2 types of languages. Question usually tricks us by putting 2 different types of languages in context of this particular topic, that is cost of consumables. So pay attention, there could be 2 possible cases. Under case 1, question will state this kind of language, that amount paid for consumables during current year was certain rupees. Or they could say payment made to the supplier of consumables during current year was rupees certain amount. And in the second case, the language tends to change. And what does it states? Stock of consumables purchased during the year was rupees certain amount. The basic difference between these 2 kind of languages is, see, amount paid for consumable during current year basically means during current year I have paid this particular amount, but the language is not specifying whether the amount paid includes the amount for current year, amount for previous year, or amount for upcoming year, or any one of them or all of them. The language of question is not exactly specifying that amount for consumables during current year was paid, but does it relates to current year only? Does it relate to current or previous year? Does it relate to current, previous, or even upcoming year? Nothing was specified here. But in second case, stock of consumable purchased during current year was rupees XYZ. Here, question has quoted it specifically that during current year you have purchased a stock of consumable for this much rupees only. That is the major difference. Case 1 was not specifying that the amount paid was pertaining to current year only, or for previous year, or for upcoming year as well. But in case number 2, question here is specifying that the amount which was paid was purely related to current year, a stock of consumable which was purchased during current year. Whereas in first case, it was written as amount paid for consumables during current year. It was during current year, and it was specifically mentioned here. See, purchased during current year. That is the major difference between these two cases. So for case number one, we have to make all the 6 adjustments. In case number one, all adjustments will be done, be it related to creditors in the beginning or at the end, stock in the beginning or at the end, or advance payment in the beginning or at the end. This principle will work in case number one only. As we have discussed all these 6 things now, should be added or deducted, what should be added, what should be deducted. All these 6 cases will be applicable in case number one. That is where question is going to use this kind of language. So all 6 adjustments are need to be made. But in case number two, where the amount has been specifically mentioned for consumables purchased during the year, then adjustments pertaining to opening and closing stock will be done only, and adjustments pertaining to creditors or advance payments should be straight away ignored, because those figures had already been taken into consideration while arriving at this particular amount. Pay attention. In case number two, you are supposed to make adjustment for opening stock and closing stock only. Rest adjustment will not be done. Any of these remaining 4 adjustments will not be done, where question is going to use language as in case number 2. So under this case, only adjustment related to stock will be done. That is, opening stock will be added and closing stock will be deducted. Rest adjustments, that is creditors and advance payments in the beginning or at the end, had already been done while arriving at the amount which will be given in the question. So you have to read the question calmly, you have to pay attention, you have to be focused while attempting the question, otherwise you're gonna commit a mistake here. In case number one, you have to make all 6 adjustments. All these adjustments will be done: stock beginning end, creditor beginning end, advance payment beginning end. But in case number 2, adjustment for stock in the beginning at the end will only be done. Rest any of adjustments will not be done. So you have to be cautious while reading your question. So let's discuss these concepts with numerical examples. Let's move to example number 1, and the example number 1 will be focusing on case 1. That means we have to make adjustments for all those 6 things which we have studied. So the question states, from the following information of NPO, show sports material item in respective accounts. See, during the current year, payment made for sports material was rupees 1,20,000. Focus on the language of the question. Payment made for sports material during current year. It is nowhere mentioned that these 1,20,000 are related to current year, upcoming year, or previous year. It simply states that payment made during current year was rupees 1,20,000. You can relate it with the language here as well. Payment made to the supplier during current year. Payment made during current year. So we have to make adjustment for all these 6 things in example number 1. So let's start. Total payment made was 1,20,000. In working note, we have first picked that particular amount. Total payment made was 1,20,000. Let's quickly adjust the amount of stock first. The amount is given in the beginning of year and at the end of year, that is 31st March 2016 and 31st March 2017. So opening stock should be added, as we have already discussed. So opening stock has been added here. Closing stock should be deducted, has been adjusted here. Creditor for sports material, beginning, the creditors in the beginning were expense of previous year, so should be deducted 7,800. Creditors for sports material by the end of current year are actually expense of current year which remains unpaid. So 9,200 should be added to current year's expense. Advance payment made in the beginning was part of current year's expense, should be added, and advance payment made at the end is part of upcoming year's expense, so should be deducted. So after making all these adjustments and computing these figures, the final amount on which we arrive is 1,07,800 that should be put to the debit side of income and expenditure account under the head sports material consumed during current financial year, 1,07,800 rupees. I'll quickly give a glimpse of this particular question again. The payment made during current year was 1,20,000 rupees. Nowhere mentioned it is related to previous year, current year, or upcoming year. It was actually paid in current year, whether it is related to any of 3 years. Adjustment in context of opening and closing stock, creditors in the beginning, at the end, advance payment in the beginning, at the end. We have already discussed what we have to do. Opening stock should be added, closing stock should be deducted, creditors in the beginning should be deducted, creditors at the end should be added. Advance payment in the beginning should be added and advance payment at the end should be deducted. Let's just quickly compare it. Opening stock add, closing stock less. Opening stock 2,200 add, closing stock 5,800 less. Creditors in the beginning less, creditors at the end add. Creditors in the beginning 7,800 less, creditors at the end 9,200 add. Advance payment in the beginning add, advance payment at the end less, advance payment in the beginning 15,000 add, advance payment at the end 25,000 less. So this was the first case of cost of consumables, under which we have to make all 6 adjustments. Now let's move to the second type of question or the second type of case where question will be confusing us by changing the language. That is a stock of consumables purchased during the year. See, I have taken the same values, the same examples. I have not changed it much. I have just changed the language. Before going to example number 2, let's just quickly finish it off by understanding their representation and balance sheet as well. Opening stock will be shown to the asset side of opening balance sheet. So here is opening balance sheet and opening stock has been mentioned to the asset side of opening balance sheet. Closing stock to the asset side of closing balance sheet. That is 5,800 rupees has been shown to the asset side of closing balance sheet. Creditors to the liability side of opening and closing balance sheet. Opening creditor 7,800 to the liability side of opening balance sheet. Creditors at the end 9,200 to the liability side of closing balance sheet. Advance payment in the beginning 15,000 to the asset side of opening balance sheet and advance payment at the end 25,000 to the asset side of closing balance sheet. Now let's quickly move on to example number 2 where the language will be changed. See, all the data remains the same in example number 1 and example number 2. 2,200, 5,800. In example number 2 as well, it remains the same. 2,200, 5,800, 78, 92, 15 and 25. 7,800, 92, 15 and 25. Even the amount paid has been taken as same value, 1,20,000 rupees. What change we have made here is the language of question. In example number 1, it states that payment made for sports material during current year. Whereas case number 2, it is saying that stock of sports material purchased during current year was rupees 1,20,000. That is the basic difference between case number 1, that is payment made for sports material during current year, and in case number 2, stock of sports material purchased during current year. Only this is the language, this is the point from where you have to identify, do we have to make all 6 adjustments or do we have to make only 2 adjustments pertaining to opening stock and closing stock. So in this particular case, that is case number 2, we have to make adjustment in context of opening and closing stock only. Why? Because while arriving at figure of 1,20,000, all remaining 4 amounts were already adjusted accordingly. Whatever we have to do, those amounts which should be added, those amounts which should be deducted had already been added or deducted while arriving at the figure of 1,20,000. The only adjustment left is to adjust opening stock and closing stock. So figure we have picked is 1,20,000. The only adjustment we have to make in context of opening and closing stock. So we have already discussed that opening stock should be added and closing stock should be deducted. So the final answer is 1,16,400 that should be debited to income and expenditure account. That was part of current year's expense. So that was a head-to-head comparison of topic number 4, cost of consumables. Question could give us two kind of languages. One where he won't be specifying whether the expense made was for current year, upcoming year, or previous year. And in case number 2 where it will be specifying the cost which we have bear to purchase consumables during current year only. In case number 1, we have to make all 6 adjustments, and in case number 2, we have to make just 2 adjustments related to stock in the beginning and at the end. Example number 1 was governing case number 1, where we have made all 6 adjustments of the figures right down here, and example number 2 was pertaining case number 2, where we have made adjustment in context of opening and closing stock only and not disturbing any of these 4 figures: 7,800, 9,200, 15,000 and 25,000. The part of representation in balance sheet remains 100% same. It remains totally unchanged. As in example number 1, same in example number 2. There is no change in balance sheet representation. There is change in representation in income and expenditure account. You can see the balance sheet of example number 1. To the asset side of opening, 2,200 and 15,000. To the liability side, 7,800. Example number 2's balance sheet, to the asset side, 2,200, 15,000. To the liability side, 7,800. Closing balance sheet, to the asset side 5,800, 25,000. To the liability side 9,200, remains 10% same. 5,800 to the asset side, 25,000 to the asset side, and only 9,200 to the liability side. The change is observed in representation in income and expenditure account only. Representation in balance sheet remains 100% same. There is no change pertaining to case number 1 or case number 2 if we talk about representation in balance sheet. So this was the last and final topic of this chapter. Now you all students are good to go. You can attempt any question from this chapter. You might be facing some difficulties because there are numerous questions, and question tends to play tricks with languages, with changes in value. So we are ready to help you. We are available to help you. So in case of any doubt related to this chapter, get in touch with us. And thank you so much for devoting your time to watch this video. Stay tuned at our channel for further videos. Thank you so much.